See, all right, hello. This is a different link on my live stream here. So I'm going to share this real quick for everybody. Okay, let's just do Twitter real quick. All right, so that's at least working. And now I'll put that on Tumblr. All right, so I've got those updated. And let's do that so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, awesome. So this is the updated or the redo of yesterday's live stream. And welcome to those who already see are online. Good to see you. And feel free to hop in the chat anytime and kind of let me know if you have any questions or comments or want me to clarify something, or if you have off-topic questions. Those are fine too. So don't be afraid to jump in the chat. It's okay. But yesterday, for whatever reason, the live stream just never went through. Like, it showed the background from Restream, and it showed the captions that I was putting up. Like, it showed stuff that I was putting on the screen, but it didn't actually show my video and audio, which, kind of defeats the purpose. So then today I was like, okay, I'm going to retry. I'm going to just do YouTube, and hopefully that'll work smoother. And this morning it didn't go through at all. So now I'm doing streaming from YouTube through the webcam thing, which meant setting up a new link. So I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, I think I can schedule one using the webcam feature, and that way next week's will hopefully go smoother, because this seems to be running really smoothly because I'm doing it straight through YouTube and not through a third party. So downside to that is I can only stream to YouTube right now. Like, I can't stream to Periscope or any other sources yet. So until I can figure that out, it'll just be YouTube. But real quick, just to kind of go over what I said to nobody yesterday. So we're talking about the non-aggression principle, and we are talking about abortion. And if you aren't familiar with the non-aggression principle, it's a very common line of reasoning in libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntary capitalist circles. And it basically, the idea is that in a just society, in a fair, free society, in a free society, that you're not going to have all these unnecessary laws, that we have. We have so many unnecessary laws in the United States, so many things that are considered crimes that really shouldn't be crimes, that shouldn't be laws, because they are not directly hurting somebody else. And it's to the point where literally nobody knows all the laws and all the details of all the laws and all the layers and how things get prosecuted and all that sort of thing. attorneys specialize, because even an individual attorney or an individual judge, like they can't know everything either, so they have to specialize. And when you get to that point, that means that the average citizen is breaking laws all the time and not even knowing it, because there's obscure laws, there's old laws, there's laws that don't make sense. And if the government wanted to then come after you and wanted to, silence you because you were saying something they didn't like, or, for whatever reason they wanted to come after you, all they'd have to do is bring up some obscure law, some strange little, thing that you didn't even know existed, that you didn't know you broke, and then they could arrest you for it. And that's a problem. So with the non-aggression principle, we're kind of simplifying it down and saying that as long as you are not hurting somebody else, okay? And now where it gets fishy or gets tricky is the definition of what it means to aggress against somebody. What is hurting somebody else? Because, we're not talking about hurting your feelings. Like, somebody hurts my feelings. That's not aggression. But the non-aggression principle is this idea that if you are actually harming somebody else, if you're actually aggressing against somebody else, against their person or their property, that you are then violating the non-aggression principle. And then what that means is that then the person who you are aggressing against, or somebody who's protecting them, so we'll get to that in a second, but the person who you're aggressing against then has the right to use force to stop you from aggressing against them, because essentially you started it. And so that's, at some level, let's say you started it kind of thing. Like, you aggressed against me, I have the right to defend myself. I don't have the right to go out of my way to harm you unless you have aggressed against me. And this also applies, so a lot of times people think of this in the context of anarcho-capitalists and saying, like, okay, we're in this free anarcho-capitalist society. We don't have government in that sense. So, these are our only rules. And this is our kind of our moral philosophy of how we interact with each other. Well, the other thing is, if you're in a libertarian mindset, and maybe you're not necessarily anarcho-capitalist, you're not on the anarchist side of things yet, and you're more thinking, okay, we want a limited government. We still want a government, we just want a limited government. Or maybe it's a local government. Maybe you're saying we want to get rid of the federal government because they're way overreaching, and we want to stick to a limited government, a limited local government, and that they are going to have this non-aggression principle law. That is then when you would call down government force. And we need to understand that government force is force. So if you're talking about using force against somebody, usually we think of that in terms of self-defense, like Second Amendment style. You're using lethal force against somebody. When you call the police on someone, you're sending government force on them. And a really great example of this is Elijah McClain. So last year in Colorado, if you're not familiar with the case, Elijah McClain was walking home at night. He had his earbuds in, he's listening to music, and he was dancing. He was moving around. And a person walking by saw him and thought, that's weird, because they didn't realize he was listening to music. They just saw him moving erratically. And so they, this person called 911. And my initial thought when I heard this was, what are you calling 911 for? And I could almost understand somebody who is concerned, oh, well, maybe they're on drugs, or maybe they have a psychiatric problem and they need help. Okay, the problem is when you call 911, you're not just calling EMS or a crisis counseling team or anything like that. You're calling the police. Even though fire and EMS and all those other emergency services are on that dispatch, you're still calling the police. And the police are who generally respond first. And in this case, that was true. And in this case, that meant that Elijah McClain died. Because the police arrived, they grabbed him. Again, he was not hurting anybody. He was walking home. The police grabbed him, pinned him down, very physically aggressive toward him. So they're committing physical aggression against him. And then, crushing his airway, all of that. And then an EMS person arrived, and they asked the EMS person to sedate him. And the EMS person gave Elijah McClain ketamine, and that ketamine ended up killing him. So the person who was walking by, the bystander, who looked and said, "That looks weird. What is he doing?" and called 911. There's a level of responsibility there, because even though he never got himself involved in the situation, he called down government force. He called down the police. And they, in turn, arrived and killed Elijah McClain. So even though the person who called 911 didn't directly kill Elijah McClain, he still used force against somebody who was not harming anyone. And so according to the non-aggression principle, we would say that's not okay. It was not okay for what the cops did, and it was not okay to call government force on somebody who was not harming anyone. Now, if Elijah McClain had been breaking windows and hurting or harassing people, then maybe then you could say, all right, he's aggressing against people. You can call the police, or you could intervene yourself. We could have a community where people intervene and we don't rely on the police. That would be great. But when we talk about the non-aggression principle, we're talking about not criminalizing behavior where you're just doing your own thing. You do your own thing, I do my own thing. We leave each other alone. We can still discuss things. We can discuss ideas. We can try and convince each other of our positions, that sort of thing. But we're not interfering with each other's lives. Now, where this gets tricky, because it's one thing to say, oh, you're aggressing against me, I defend myself. Where it gets tricky is where you have a vulnerable person who does not have the capability to defend themselves, and they're being aggressed against. And so my understanding of the non-aggression principle, and that of most libertarians and people that I know, is that you don't only have the right to defend yourself, you also have the right to defend a vulnerable person who's being aggressed against. So if you're saying, okay, non-aggression principle, if you are aggressing against a vulnerable person, you are violating that. And now I don't necessarily have to intervene, because again, I can go live my life, I can ignore whatever else is going on, but I would be justified in intervening if you are aggressing against a helpless person who cannot defend themselves. At the same time, think about private security. So if I were to hire a private security force and we lived in this non-aggression principle society, okay, and somebody tries to break into my home, my private security force would be justified because I've contracted with them. I've done a voluntary contract with them for them to defend my property and myself. Then if somebody tries to aggress against me, they would then be justified because I've given them that responsibility of defending me and defending my property. So we can have the concept, even especially in a libertarian society where we still have a government, we still have maybe some sort of police force, even if it doesn't look anything like what it does today. You can still have the concept of I can call on a use of force, whether that's my own force, my own resources, or government force if we live in a situation where that is set up, because somebody is aggressing against me, or because somebody is aggressing against a helpless person who cannot speak up for themselves, who cannot defend themselves, who cannot fight back. And that would especially apply to children. That's our first thought there is, well, what about a child who's being abused? Do you have the right to intervene if you see or hear with pretty good certainty that a child is being abused? If you're walking past your neighbor's house and you happen to glance in the window, you're not trying to, you're not peeking in their windows, but you happen to look or you hear, and you're like, oh, that child's being abused from what you see or what you hear, you would be justified intervening on behalf of that child, because that child is being aggressed against and does not have the means to defend themselves. So that's the way I look at it, and my understanding is that that's the way most libertarians and ANCAPs and voluntary capitalists look at it. So, if we say that you are able to defend yourself, you're able to defend somebody who's vulnerable, and that includes children, Then we can talk about abortion. And so this is where, some people will try to use the non-aggression principle to defend abortion because, and it really comes down to whether or not you see the preborn human being, the living, growing, biological human being, as a person who can be aggressed against. And so, and whether you see that human being as someone who is capable of aggressing against you. So if we have this human being, if we have this preborn human child, living human, are they somebody who can be aggressed against? And I would say yes, because they are a human person, right? They have rights. They have human rights. They have natural rights, and given to them by their creator. And then you have, then are they able to aggress against you? And I want you to Google, if you aren't sure on this, if you're like, I don't know if that makes sense, just Google, 12-week fetus. Just Google it. Okay. 12-week unborn baby, however you want to Google it. And tell me if they're aggressing against anyone, if they have the means by which to aggress against somebody. This is a child that is growing and developing in their natural environment. And this is the thing. If you argue that the preborn child is aggressing against you, you're saying that their existence is an aggression, because all they're doing is existing in their natural environment and growing along their own natural developmental path. So at that point, then you're saying that this person's existence is aggression against me, and therefore I have the right to use force on them. And I think that's a really concerning path to go down, because once you open that door, even if you're like, well, technically in this case, once you open that door that somebody can aggress by existing, we can have a lot of other problems. So I would say, no, you cannot aggress against somebody just by existing. And this is not this fetus, this human being did not, is not attacking you, is not invading you. They literally came into existence inside your body. They literally came into existence in the fallopian tube and traveled down and implanted in the uterus. And they only implant in the uterus with chemical communication between the mother's body and the child's. So the fact that you're even pregnant means that your body communicated with that little embryo to help them, to guide them to implant. Okay, now you may not have chosen that. You didn't do that cognitively, but neither did they. This was a subconscious, non-cognitive decision, right? That your body made and their body made, and they are now implanted. And the thing is, you're not, defending yourself against somebody who's trying to break in. They're there. By the time you find out you're pregnant, they're there. They're implanted, they are growing. By the time most women find out they're pregnant, there's a heartbeat. And then to say, you know what, rather than letting this child continue to grow and develop, I'm going to aggress against this child, that would violate the non-aggression principle. You would not have justification in that. And now here's the thing. When we're talking about abortion in our current society, the way abortion currently works, in the vast majority of cases, we're not talking about the pregnant person aggressing against a child. We're talking about an abortion provider committing that abortion against a child. So we're talking about 3 people involved here. And the abortion provider is committing that aggression on behalf of the mother. The mother says, I want to end this pregnancy. I'm going to pay you, the abortion provider, to end this pregnancy for me. And the abortion provider has a different level of culpability than the mother, in my view. And Josh Brown at Equal Rights Institute, they did a really good thing on this recently, talking about moral culpability. And basically, it's the idea that when somebody commits a crime, or an act of aggression in this case, their culpability is kind of on a spectrum, on a continuum. And like on one end of the continuum over here, you have or over here, I guess. Yeah, on this end of the continuum, you have somebody who does not know what they're doing, who does not have any control over the situation in some cases. Let's say somebody who's having a forced abortion. They're being forced to have an abortion. They would be over here and have no culpability in that. Then you have somebody over here on this end who has all the culpability, and that would be the abortion provider. Because they are choosing to perform that abortion. They know exactly what they're doing. And that's the other thing, is in the middle, you're going to have somebody living in our current society who grew up in our current society and heard the message, heard the propaganda for decades, saying that it's just a clump of cells, it's just a piece of tissue, it doesn't matter, it's not, it's not a person. And so even though the real information, the truth is there, you can learn the truth, you can understand how somebody growing up in our current society would be confused. And so while that doesn't erase their culpability, it does lessen it in comparison with the abortion provider. The abortion provider went to medical school, presumably, let's hope, and therefore knows exactly what they are destroying in that abortion, who they are aggressing against. And so if you take that culpability of the abortion provider and you say, okay, they are culpable, they are responsible for the aggression that they are committing, okay, then you would say, is the abortion provider primarily who is violating the non-aggression principle? So if we're talking about a society in which abortion is illegal because it violates the non-aggression principle, we're talking about abortion providers, not pregnant women. So we're not talking about putting pregnant women in jail, okay, or using force against them or something. We're talking about abortion providers who are choosing of their own free will, to perform an aggression, to commit an aggression against this helpless, vulnerable child. And so in my view, that would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. And in a society that has its laws based on that principle, you would be able to abolish abortion and hold abortion providers culpable, hold them responsible for their actions, that they aggressed against a child and that child was not aggressing against anyone. And now here's the thing. When you talk about, and the next thing that people bring up is, well, what about when the mother's life is in danger or she's got a severe health risk? If she has a severe health risk, okay, that is not the child aggressing against her. That is a health condition that exists in her body, and in many cases existed prior to her pregnancy, and she may not have known about it. So it's not necessarily that the child is doing something to her. It's that her body, for whatever reason, is not handling the pregnancy well. And that's a medical problem. It's not a violent, it's not an act of violence. And so calling it an aggression doesn't necessarily make sense from that perspective. And because it is a non-violent problem, it's a problem. It's certainly a problem. It is a non-violent problem, and so should have a non-violent solution, because nobody's aggressing against the mother. Violence is not justified in that scenario. And so if she's in that situation, it is the duty of the doctor, the responsibility of the doctor is to find a non-violent solution, preferably one that saves both mother and child. We know sometimes that's not possible. We know sometimes the child is not going to make it. Sometimes we have to deliver a child early. But then every effort, if you deliver that child early, every effort should be made to save that child, because it is a vulnerable, helpless child that was didn't choose to be in that situation any more than the mother did. In fact, in some cases, less than the mother did. The child had less say in the matter and less choice in their own existence. So they're not choosing to aggress. They're not choosing to cause all these problems. And in many cases, they're not the one causing the problems. It's the problems have been aggravated. The problems have been kind of kicked up because of the pregnancy. And so the child is not responsible for that. And so, and the same would be true too for the vast majority of abortions. When they've done studies on why women have abortions, the vast majority are women who cite financial or otherwise like situational concerns, such as I can't afford a baby, I can't afford to take care of my own children, I can't be a mother right now, I'm not ready to be a mother. It tends to be reasons like that. Those tend to be the explanations for why she chooses the abortion. And in those circumstances, again, it is not the child that is causing these problems. These are generally problems that already existed or things that were already happening in that mother's life, and that the child is just an extra layer of complication. And again, in the vast majority of cases, that's a non-violent problem. Or if there is violence involved, it's on the part of like an abusive partner, and it's not on the part of the child. And so if you're talking about someone violating the non-aggression principle, it's not the child. The child didn't choose to be there. The child didn't choose to cause these problems. And to say that the child is somehow violating non-aggression principle by existing at an inconvenient time or in an inconvenient situation I would say is disingenuous. I don't think that's a legitimate claim. Just on its face, I think you look at that 12-week, 10-week, 8-week child, and you say, how is that child aggressing against anybody? You look at a newborn, how is that child aggressing against anybody? They're just existing. They're just living. They're just growing. So this is why, I'm a pro-life libertarian. A lot of people are like, well, how can you be libertarian and pro-life? Because you're taking away women's choices. I don't know any libertarian anywhere who thinks that every person should be able to literally do whatever they want at all times, even if it hurts somebody else. I don't know anybody who thinks that, right? My choices don't involve me harming other people. I can choose to do those things, but those are not valid choices. Those are not morally acceptable choices. Those are not good choices for me to make. And in a society that enforces the non-aggression principle, whether that's a small community group or a larger government that enforces this non-aggression principle and says, okay, we're only going to enforce laws that breaking them is a violation of the non-aggression principle. You're hurting somebody else. In that society, I think it is perfectly reasonable to say that the preborn human being, as a vulnerable, helpless child who is not choosing to be there and is not committing any acts of aggression, should not be treated with violence, and that doing so would be an act of aggression that is unwarranted. And so again, I'm not advocating for putting pregnant women in jail or punishing them. I'm advocating for that the abortion provider who is fully culpable, who knows exactly what they're doing, and who's choosing freely to commit that act of aggression, that they should be held responsible for the life of that child. So as we kind of envision, as libertarians and as pro-life people, and we envision a society in which things are more just and more fair and more free, we need to envision a society in which every human life has value and every human person has equal rights, and that those rights are respected, and that we're not excluding a group of people from that human family, from that group of people who have human rights, based on things like development, age, location, any of that. We need to be promoting equal rights for all human beings, human rights for all humans, right? I say that all the time. And we need to be doing so from a perspective of not of control or taking away choices, but from a perspective of protecting the vulnerable. And we've heard all about protecting the vulnerable in the last 5 months or last 4 months or however long it's been. We've heard so much about protecting the vulnerable. And we have vulnerable right now, vulnerable people every single day that are being killed in abortion facilities, even while COVID's going on. The abortion facilities are open in the vast majority of states. Abortions are happening. Children are being killed. They are being aggressed against. And so in this society, as we try to build this free society and we try to push back against aggression from the state, we need to recognize that when the state says, oh, this group of human beings does not deserve protection, does not deserve rights, we're going to exclude them. And we're going to sanction and even fund, in many cases, we're going to fund the people who are aggressing against them. As a libertarian and a pro-life person, I have a huge problem with that. And so that's essentially, that is how I, as a pro-life libertarian, understand the non-aggression principle as it relates to abortion. If anybody's got questions on what I've said so far, please throw those in the chat. I see we got a few people who've been watching the whole time and a couple people who've jumped in and out. But the whole video should be on my channel. And if you want to watch it again, and if you want to ask questions through my Tumblr, so my Tumblr is prolifeproliberty.tumblr.com. And the links should be in the description. Let me make sure they are. I think they are. Yes, all the links are in the description. If you want to support this channel and you like the stuff that I'm saying, or you like my Tumblr blog, maybe you're coming over here from Tumblr or from Twitter, and you just want to support what I'm doing and what I'm saying, there's a link down there to Ko-fi. It's ko-fi, coffee.com/prolifeproliberty, and I would really appreciate that. Otherwise, please hit like on the channel or on the video if you haven't done so already, because that does really help. It tells YouTube that you're interested in what I'm saying and that you like what I'm saying and that you want to hear more from me. And that's the thing, is like the YouTube algorithm doesn't show you all videos. Even if you're like subscribed to my channel, it won't show you everything unless you're liking and commenting and all that kind of stuff, because the algorithm says, oh, if you didn't hit like, then you're not really interested and you don't want to see more from this person. So it really does help if you hit like and hit subscribe if you've been watching my videos and you haven't subscribed yet. So but thank you all for being here. And really, I'm gonna keep doing these streams. It's probably gonna be here through YouTube unless I find a better setup. But yeah. And real quick, let me do a real quick on before I go, since some of y'all are still here. Real quick on the Portland federal agents issue. So again, like on the non-aggression principle, we're talking about, people who are, again, it's, I think we're waiting on details to come out from there. Like, I think we're missing some details in those situations, but what we're seeing is the state committing aggression, not according to the Constitution, where we've authorized the government to use force in very specific certain circumstances. And that is not what is happening in Portland. So people are not getting their due process rights, who are being arrested by these unidentified federal agents. And here's the thing, is we may not agree with the people who are getting arrested. In many cases are rioters, not even just protesters necessarily. Some of them may be protesters. A lot of them are rioters, as in that they are doing damage to property, in many cases private property. So they are violating the non-aggression principle in that instance. But we have a constitution that sets up a procedure for what to do when somebody commits a crime, and that's called due process. And that due process is not being followed in these arrests. So yes, the people who are being arrested in many cases committed crimes, as far as I know, but they still have due process rights. And so I think it's really important that we are not celebrating these arrests in Portland, that we are not saying, oh, look, that's what you get or that's what you deserve. I don't want us to go down that route. As libertarians, as pro-life people, I want us to recognize this for what it is, that these are government agents that are not accountable to anyone, that are coming in and arresting people without due process. And that's really concerning. And not only has it, not only is this happening, but Trump apparently is supportive of it. Now, I don't know if he ordered these arrests himself or if he sent these federal agents in, or if he's just hearing about it. Maybe he's not getting the full picture. Maybe, I don't know who these people are accountable to. But he's not only saying that this is a good thing, but that he's going to send them into more cities. So even if you don't live in Portland, you're like, oh, I don't live in Portland, this isn't a big deal. If these, and we'll call them, they're secret police. That's how they're operating. They're operating like secret police. And if they come to your city and start arresting people, what are you going to say then? And then, you might still say, oh, well, I'm not one of those people who's getting arrested. I'm not rioting. I'm not committing crimes. I'm not doing any of that. I'm not, I'm just minding my own business. How long does it take for the federal government to pivot and say, now you're the threat? Now you're the threat because you are not falling in line. You're not wearing a mask. You might be a super spreader. You might be a typhoid Mary. Maybe we come grab you off the street. So I think it's important for us as libertarians not to ignore what's happening in Portland. We don't have to be supporting the people who are getting arrested because they may be doing their own, like, in many cases, they are anti-private property rights and they are anti-liberty. So we don't want to necessarily throw in our support behind them either. We don't necessarily want to take sides in this issue, but we do want to say, hey, hold on. This is concerning and we need to be watching this to see where it develops and to make sure that bystanders or people who are not committing acts of aggression, don't become the next victims of this. So I just think it's important that we watch it and that we take it seriously. Even if we don't support the people who are being arrested, we say, okay, well, they were committing crimes and that needed to be taken care of. Okay, but when you get rid of due process, everybody's liberties are in danger. So that's my 2 cents on that. Again, thank y'all for watching, and thank you those who stuck around to the very end. I will be, getting to the, I'll be doing another one of these streams on Monday. And if y'all want to let me know through Tumblr or through, I think I'll add the feedback form link in the description on this video. You can kind of let me know what you think I should talk about next week. And with that, I'll see y'all on Monday.